Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 667 for the 5th of Tishrei in a regular year. So we're going to get a little philosophical today, so put on your seatbelts and get ready. We're going to talk about creation ex nihilo. And specifically, we're going to talk about the idea that, interestingly, we find that in the Tanya, in Kabbalistic books and things like that, when we use the word creation, in Hebrew, the word Briya specifically, we really only apply this word when we're talking about creation ex nihilo. So what do I mean by this? So this is going to bring us back actually to something that we actually discussed in Shari Chudvamuna way back, where we talked about, human creation versus godly creation and really the difference between the two. We use the word creation a lot, we'll say that Mozart created a musical masterpiece, or a carpenter creates a table, or an artist creates a painting. Like, there's lots of different ways that we can think about creation in our daily human life. However, we talked about the difference when it comes to human creation versus godly creation is that in terms of human creation, humans are only capable of creating something that is from something else, something from something. So if, Mozart's writing out the musical piece, he's taking musical notes, which already exist, and he's just reformulating them in a new way. Or a carpenter who makes a table, who creates a table. He's taking wood that pre-exists and he's forming it in a new way. A painter, is taking paint that already exists, an easel that already exists. He's taking all these raw materials and yes, he's forming them in a new way, in a creative kind of way. But it's really a something from something kind of creation. And the interesting thing about this something from something kind of creation, it has a very overt cause and effect aspect to it. So people who are really art connoisseurs, they can look at a painting and they can tell you what raw materials that painting was created from, what era it was made in, all the different things like that, what specific colors the artist used. So we see a very direct link to the effect, namely the painting, and the cause, namely the painter, and the materials that he used. So now in that section of Shari Chudvamuna where we talked about human creation versus godly creation, we talked about how this is really what makes godly creation distinct, because only God is capable of creating something ex nihilo, something from nothing. Or it's not that he's taking these raw materials and forming them and shaping them in a certain way so that then afterwards you can go and look at that, the cause, look at the effects, look at, the end result and trace it back to the cause. God creates things in such a way, namely our world, for example, in such a way that it is created something from nothing, meaning that it's not coming from anywhere. It doesn't have this like raw material that it was just like shaped and formed into. It's a whole new entity. So that's really what makes it distinct. And by virtue of this, it also, you can't, it's not the cause and effect relationship is not as apparent in something from nothing creation. Like you look at something and you don't necessarily see the nothing that it came from. Like if you look at, anything that's made in the world, then if you look at it enough, you can break down the raw materials that it's made out of. But what about the raw materials? What about like the base, rocks and things like that? When you really break them down, sure, we can say like, the various components of the rock, but we don't really see the nothingness that it comes from. So this is, on a very basic level, why it is, how we can come to understand that the term creation in Kabbalah, in Hasidus, really only is speaking about, is referring to those things which were created something from nothing, because that is truly what true creation is. So great. So, that's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, right? So the Alter Rebbe today is actually going to throw a wrench into this line of reasoning, and he's going to tell us that it's not that simple, and we have to kind of understand this on a deeper level. Because if you start to learn Chassidus, one of the things about learning Chassidus that's really interesting is, like, while on the one hand we're gaining knowledge, on the other hand we're also gaining questions. It's like the more you know, the more questions come up, the more uncertainty there is. There's a lot of, one thing leads to another. The more one thing becomes clear, it's like, but wait a minute, what about that? What about that? What about that? So we see that here very much so also, because this line of reasoning that, true creation is really creation something from nothing, because it doesn't, have a cause effect relationship in the same way. That makes a lot of sense if you don't learn a lot of Chassidus. However, what's the problem once you start learning a lot of Chassidus is that once you start learning a lot of Chassidus, you start to, as we've been learning in the Tanya, you start to see that our world, while, it may not be as overt to the naked eye as, like, to somebody who sees a watch and they can see that the watch has a maker to it, and that really the watch is nothing without the maker of the watch and all of that stuff. We know that this is actually the same thing when it comes to our world, that the world that we live in, this physical world that we live in, really is absolutely not a nothingness without its creator, and that we're constantly being sustained by the word of God, something from nothing at every single moment. And if God were, we talked about this also in Shari Chod B'Emunah, if God were to remove his letters from the world at any moment, God forbid, the whole world would revert to not a nothingness, as if it never existed at all. So we are hanging on this very, very thin thread, and we do very much have a cause to it. So there is this cause-effect relationship to our world. And just like in the case of the watch, in the case of the painting, or all those things, the effect is very much nullified to the cause, and it wouldn't exist without the cause. The same thing is true of our world. The same thing is true of Ex Nihilo creation, that the yesh, that the something would not exist if not for the nothing from which it comes. And then that's another question, is why is it called nothing? Because it's not nothing. God's not nothing, right? God's the opposite of nothing. God's the source of everything. So why do we call it nothing? So these are the questions that we're going to address in today's section today. And the bottom line that we're going to get to, and we're going to get into the text in just a minute, is that while yes, this is indeed true, that our world very much has a source to it, and our world, in fact, is 100% nullified to its source in God. The yesh, the something, is totally nullified to the ayin. Reality is really only manifest from God's perspective to the fullest extent. And that's what makes it different, because with every other cause-effect relationship, when it is more of this like causality kind of thing, the something that's created from the something, in the case of a something from something relationship, it has a sense, assuming that these things could feel or sense or whatever, but it's obvious to everybody that the effect that's created, the watch, the painting, all of these things, its effect is very noticeable to itself, like from its own perspective. However, for us, when we're talking about ex nihilo creation, when we're talking about something from nothing creation, then the something that's created is not really aware of its nothingness. It's not really aware that its source is nothing. It feels very much to be a something. So that's something that makes it distinct. The second thing that makes it distinct is that in every other type of creation, when we're talking about something from something creation, there's a very strong relationship in terms of the raw materials between the cause and between the effect. So just like we talked about with like a painter, for example, in a painting, that, the paint is on the paper. So you can actually see the different colors that the painter used. It's very obvious. Mozart, in composing his different symphonies, or really any musician, you can break down the specific notes that they're using. It's not something foreign. It's not some strange thing that they're doing. They're using very well-known notes and then making that and forming it in a specific way. However, when it comes to something from nothing creation, the nothing is totally different than the something. It's like there isn't that same relationship there. Like when we talk about us versus God, it's like, our source and God, there's no, it's two different realms of ideas. It's like two totally different categories of things. It's like if somebody were to create a table by using musical notes, like that wouldn't make any sense. That's, it's a nonsensical thing, at least to our eyes. So these are the two ways by which creation, something from nothing, really is distinct. One is that from the standpoint, from the perception of the creation, namely us, then we don't feel that we have a cause. We might, intellectually know it. It might be something that we learn about in Chassidus and philosophize about, but it's not something that's felt innately. And secondly, even if we have a perception of it, even if we have some kind of awareness, we have come to some kind of understanding, some kind of humility to recognize that we don't come from ourselves and we do have a maker, we do have a creator. This creator that we come from, this source, this nothingness that we come from, is really so different than who we are that there's no relationship to it at all, which is why, in fact, we call it nothing. Not because, God forbid, God is a nothing, but because Ayin is sort of like, it's like null, it's like it's stating the fact that it's beyond anything that we can pinpoint, that we can point to and say this is what it is. So with that being said, let's get into the text and see how the Alter Rebbe explains all of this. For context, we're in the middle of Epistle 20 in Iggeres HaKodesh, and so here we go. So the Alter Rebbe begins, and he says that while it's true that every created substance, everything, every something, is totally considered like not and nothing before God, as we've spoken about many times in the Tanya, meaning to say not only that it's considered as if not and nothing compared to God, but it's actually nullified in its source in comparison to the vitality and the light that is that flows within it. And then the Alter Rebbe goes on to explain that this vitality, this light that flows within these created beings comes specifically, getting technical here, from the vessels of the 10 spheros of Atzilus, Briya, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. These are the 4 primary spiritual worlds, and they each have 10 spheres within them, and each of these 10 spheres have an aspect of a light and an aspect of vessel. And so it's specifically this Yeshus, this somethingness, comes from the vessel aspect of the 10 spheres of these 4 worlds, within which is found the kav, the literally translated as the line of the infinite light of God that shines within them, that radiates within them. So the discussion of the kav is a much bigger discussion for another time, but the kav is basically it means a line. It's like this measuring stick that God uses before creation to measure out all of existence. And so this is the source really of the radiance of godliness, the radiance of life that's in everything. And so this kav, this radiance is found within all things through the aspect of the vessels. The vessels contain this life force, and the Alter Rebbe likens this to like the sun ray while it is still within the sun itself, as we spoke about before in Shar Yechud B'Amunah, right, in the second part of the Tanya, the Shar Yechud B'Amunah. So go back and listen to those episodes where we discussed this at length, where we really talked about the nature of existence and what that's all about, how everything is nullified in God, just like the sun and all of that. So however, so now the Alter Rebbe says that while this is the true truth that we're all nullified in the face of God, and we say that everything is considered as if not before him, the Alter Rebbe specifies here this word before him is very important, and we specifically say before him because this is before him, meaning to say from God's perspective. From God's perspective, this is how God sees things. God is like the sun, lahavdil, that perceives the light, and the light of the sun and the sun rays is totally nullified within the sun itself. However, when we talk about the knowledge that comes from below to above, then, and this is talking about like a a created being who is something separate, totally separate, and has its own understanding and comprehension down here below, right? Like that's like what we have here below. We don't experience this, right? We feel ourselves to be very real. We feel ourselves to be very different than God, very independent from God. And this is because this power, this source that we have that's within us is something that is way beyond our comprehension at all. And there's no similarity. There's no parallel between one thing to the other, not in a small way, not in a big way. It's not like the cause and effect type of thing. So just like we spoke about in the introduction, where something that has a cause and has an effect, there's a relationship between the two things, because we know that anything that's the effect of something has some understanding of its cause. Like let's say if you're feeling a certain way, let's say you have a certain emotion and you're like, why am I feeling sad today? Why am I feeling happy? Usually, if you think about it enough, you can think about it. It usually has a cause of some way, or like, let's say if there's a bruise on your body, where did that bruise come from? It's like, if you think about it, you can figure out, oh yeah, because I banged myself, right? And I got that bruise. So there's some relationship between the cause and the effect, and the cause and the effect usually has some type of awareness of its cause, and it's nullified to it, right? Like there's a sense of subjugation to it. Like people feel this is, I mean, in a negative way, this is where people feel victims to their circumstances. They feel like that these things cause them to behave in a certain way. Or you have a bruise on your body, it was caused by you hitting your knee on a chair or whatever it is. And not only is there an awareness of a cause, like does an effect have somewhat of an awareness of its cause, it's also, and it's nullified to it, it also, there's a recognition that they're not that different. The cause and the effect actually are somewhat similar. There's something similar about them. And the Alter Rebbe says that this is definitely not the case, not in a small measure at all. Is this the case when we talk about this idea of created beings that were created from something from nothing? This is why we specifically call them yesh mi'ain, something from nothing, ex nihilo, something from nothing. What is this nothing? What do we mean by nothing? So we mean that it's something that is so beyond our comprehension. It's not, we can't call it a thing because it's so different than who we are, this nothingness, this source of our existence. And also it's an acknowledgement of the fact that it exists in such a way that is really just very different than who we are. So that's the end of this section for today, and we're going to continue along these lines tomorrow when we get into the mechanisms whereby this ex nihilo creation happened. And spoiler alert, it has to do with something called vessels, or kelim in Hebrew. So stay tuned for that, and I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.